The invitation was still on the fridge when I figured it out, not pinned loosely or half forgotten under a takeout magnet. It was centered, deliberate, the way my mother does things. Cream cardstock with sage green lettering. Mara and Cole. June 14th. Cincinnati Botanical Garden. I had looked at it every single morning for 4 months. I had picked the font. I had approved the wording. I had cried a little. Genuinely. The first time the box arrived. And then one Tuesday evening in late May, I was standing in my kitchen eating crackers over the sink because I hadn't had time for a real dinner. And I glanced at that invitation, and something about it made my stomach drop in a way I couldn't immediately explain. Cole wasn't home yet. He'd texted around 5 saying he was stuck at a work thing and would grab food on the way back. That was normal. Cole had a demanding job. He was a project manager for a mid-sized construction firm, lots of moving pieces, lots of late calls. I had never questioned it. I was a forensic accountant. I spent my days untangling financial inconsistencies for corporate litigation clients. I was trained to notice when numbers didn't add up. I just hadn't been applying that skill to my own life. My name is Mara Ellison. I was 29 years old, living in a 2-bedroom apartment in Cincinnati's Oakley neighborhood with my fiancé of 14 months, 13 days from our wedding. I was the kind of person who kept a detailed shared calendar, who confirmed restaurant reservations twice, who had already broken in the heels I was planning to wear so I wouldn't be uncomfortable during photos. I was organized. I was careful. I thought I was paying attention. I wasn't. The thing that started it wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a lipstick on a collar moment or a suspicious phone call I accidentally overheard. It was a receipt. A gas station receipt, specifically, that I found in the pocket of Cole's gray jacket when I was moving it from the chair to the closet. A task I had been meaning to do for 3 days because it bothered me sitting there. The receipt was from a station on the east side of the city, which wouldn't have been strange, except Cole had told me that particular Tuesday he'd spent his whole afternoon in a meeting in Blue Ash, which is northwest. Gas stations don't migrate. That one sat 14 miles in the wrong direction. I folded the receipt and put it on the kitchen counter. I told myself there was a reasonable explanation. Maybe he'd taken a different route. Maybe he'd had to run an errand he forgot to mention. I was not the kind of person who built an entire case out of a single data point. I finished my crackers. I watched 20 minutes of a show I couldn't focus on. I went to bed before he got home, but the receipt was still on the counter in the morning. And Cole didn't mention it. He stepped around it. Made coffee. Kissed my forehead. Asked if I wanted eggs, and I watched him the way I watch spreadsheets when something is slightly off. Quietly, without signaling anything, just cataloging. He didn't look at the receipt. Not once. That bothered me more than the receipt itself. I want to be honest about something, because I think it matters. I am not a suspicious person by nature. I don't go looking for problems. I have a tendency, actually, to give people more benefit of the doubt than they've probably earned. My therapist, who I'd been seeing on and off for 2 years, had pointed this out multiple times. She called it explaining away. I was very good at finding reasons why something uncomfortable was probably fine. So even after the receipt, I wasn't convinced something was wrong. I was just aware. A background hum of awareness I hadn't felt before. The following Saturday, my younger sister Bex came over for what we called our standing brunch, a habit we'd kept up since she moved to Cincinnati 2 years ago, fresh off a rough breakup and needing to be near family. She was 26, worked in graphic design, had a laugh that filled a room. She and I had always been close in the way sisters are, when there's just enough distance between them, enough space to be friends rather than rivals. She was already at the table when I came out of the bedroom, which meant Cole had let her in. The two of them were laughing about something. I stood in the hallway for just a second longer than I needed to, watching them through the gap in the door. Nothing happened. They were just laughing. But there was a comfort between them that felt different. Less like future brother and sister-in-law, more like people who shared something. I came in smiling. I made mimosas. I sat across from both of them and I was completely normal the entire morning, but the accountant part of my brain had already opened a new file. Before Bex left, she hugged me at the door and said she was so excited for the wedding. She squeezed my hands. She looked me right in the eye, and I hugged her back and said I was too, and I meant it. And I also noticed that when she said goodbye to Cole, she touched his arm just a half-second longer than you'd expect. Maybe it was nothing. I had been telling myself that for days by then. I went back inside and looked at the invitation on the fridge. June 14th. 13 days away. If you're new here, please take a second to like this video and subscribe. I share stories every week, and I really think you're going to want to hear how this one ends. Stay with me, because it gets so much worse before it gets better. I went to work Monday and I pulled up a blank spreadsheet. Not for a client, for myself. The spreadsheet sounds cold, I know, but that's how my brain works under pressure. When I'm anxious, I need somewhere to put things. I need structure. Otherwise, I sit in the feeling and it gets loud and I start making decisions based on panic instead of information. So yes, I opened a blank document and I started logging what I knew, what I had observed, and what I couldn't yet explain. Column A, date. Column B, event. Column C, what didn't fit. The gas receipt was row 1. The too long laugh was row 2. The arm touch was row 3. I looked at those 3 entries and felt embarrassed. 3 things. That was nothing. People could dismantle an entire relationship over 3 coincidences and feel righteous about it. I had watched clients in litigation do exactly that. Connect dots that weren't meant to be connected. Build airtight stories out of circumstantial noise. I did not want to be that person. I closed the laptop and went to my 11 o'clock call, but then Wednesday happened. Cole and I had a final venue walkthrough scheduled for that Wednesday at 4. The Botanical Garden event coordinator, a meticulous woman named Helen, had been wonderfully patient with our back and forth on the ceremony layout. This was the last in-person check before everything was locked. I had blocked the afternoon. I had reminded Cole twice, including a calendar invite with the address already loaded. He forgot. I stood in the garden for 40 minutes with Helen, going through the aisle width and the table positioning and the lighting setup, while texting Cole with increasing frequency. He finally replied at 4:40. Sorry, babe. Completely lost track. Something came up at work. How was it? How was it? I typed back fine and put my phone in my bag and drove home. I didn't cry in the car, which I thought was interesting. I was more clinical, the way I get when I'm reading a financial report and something isn't reconciling and I haven't found the error yet. When he got home that night, Cole apologized in the thorough, practiced way he had. He was good at apologies. He made them feel warm and specific. He said he felt terrible. He said he'd make it up to me. He said the wedding was everything to him and one bad afternoon didn't represent how much he cared. I nodded and said I understood. And I went to bed early with a headache. I added row 4 to the spreadsheet the next morning. The 5th thing came from my mother, which I genuinely didn't expect. My mother, Diane, had been the most enthusiastic person in my orbit about this wedding. She had opinions about centerpieces. She had sent me 3 separate links to bridal hairstyles in February alone. She was thrilled about Cole in that slightly performative way mothers sometimes are when they think a daughter has finally done something right. So when I called her Thursday evening to talk through some final family seating, there were some complicated feelings between my dad's side and my aunt's side that needed managing. I was not expecting her to go quiet mid-sentence. I had been talking about where to put my cousin Danny, and she just paused. And then she said, Mara, are you and Cole doing okay? I felt my chest tighten. Why would you ask that? Bex mentioned something. Nothing specific. Just that she thought you two seemed stressed. I kept my voice very even. Bex said that? She said she'd noticed some tension at brunch. She was just worried about you. I thanked my mother and told her everything was fine, and got off the phone as quickly as I could without sounding alarmed. Then I sat on my bathroom floor for a while, not because of the content of what my mother said, but because of the move. Bex had preemptively framed a narrative. She had planted the idea, with our mother, of all people, that my relationship was in trouble. That was not a thing you did because you were worried about your sister. That was a thing you did because you were preparing an explanation. I know that sounds like a leap. I heard myself making it and I second-guessed it immediately. But I had spent 6 years working in forensic accounting. I had sat across from people who had stolen hundreds of thousands of dollars from their own companies and watched them construct alternative explanations in real time. There was a specific pattern to it. You don't wait until you're accused. You start shaping the story early, from a place of apparent concern, through someone the target trusts. My mother trusted Bex completely. Everyone did. I went back to the spreadsheet. Added rows 5 and 6. That weekend, Cole went to what he said was a day trip to help his friend Marcus move some furniture. He left at 9 in the morning and came back at 7 that evening. He brought home pizza, seemed relaxed, showed me a photo of Marcus's new apartment. I looked at the photo. I recognized the living room. Then I realized I recognized it because I had seen it before. A photo Marcus had posted online 3 months ago, when he'd first moved in. I didn't say anything. I saved the photo to my phone instead. I want to be honest about what I was feeling at that point. Because it wasn't rage, it wasn't even grief yet. It was something closer to the feeling you get when you're doing a reconciliation, and you realize the error isn't random, it isn't careless, it's a pattern. Someone made these choices deliberately. Someone has been making these choices for a while. The sadness comes later. What comes first is clarity. I called my best friend Jody that Sunday night, and I didn't tell her everything. I told her I needed to ask her something without her asking me why. She said, okay, obviously, because she is a good friend. I asked her if she'd noticed anything between Cole and Bex at my birthday dinner back in April. She was quiet for a long moment. And then she said, I didn't want to be the one to bring it up. I closed my eyes. Tell me, I said. Jody had seen them in the parking lot. Not doing anything, she was quick to say, she did not want me to picture something cinematic, something I couldn't unsee. She had walked out early to get her jacket from her car and she had seen them standing close together near the side entrance of the restaurant. Talking. Quietly, she said, earnestly. And when they saw her, they separated and the conversation stopped, and Cole waved like nothing had happened, and Bex looked down at her phone. Jody said she had spent 6 weeks trying to convince herself it was nothing. I didn't want to ruin your wedding, she said. Her voice cracked a little. I kept thinking, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it was just a conversation. Maybe it was, I said. And I meant it, mostly. But I wrote it down. The birthday dinner was April 3rd. I went back through my phone and looked at photos from that night. Nothing strange, visible. But Jody had been sitting across from Cole all evening. And she had mentioned afterward, casually, in a text I hadn't thought twice about at the time, that Cole and Bex had both disappeared for almost 20 minutes during dessert. I had assumed a bathroom break, a phone call, some overlap of timing, 14 miles in the wrong direction, a missing 20 minutes. A preemptive conversation with my mother. A photo 3 months old presented as proof of a day trip. The shape of it was forming. I did not confront Cole that week. I want to explain why, because I think some people would have. I think some people would have looked at what I had and felt justified. But I had learned, professionally and personally, that confrontation before you're ready hands control to the other person. They get to react. They get to shape your doubts. They can apologize convincingly, or get angry in a way that makes you feel guilty for asking, or give you an explanation just plausible enough that you spend the next 2 months wondering if you overreacted. I was not going to overreact. And I was not going to underreact. I was going to know for certain. I started paying attention to logistics. Cole's phone habits had shifted slightly over the past month. Not dramatically, not in a way that would register to someone not specifically watching, but his phone was now face down on every surface. He angled slightly away when texting. He had started charging it in the kitchen instead of on his nightstand, which he'd done every night for 3 years without variation. I noticed. I didn't react. I kept my face easy and my tone warm, and I brought home dinner twice that week just because. The confirmation came from an unlikely source. My Aunt Rosa, who was coming in from Cleveland for the wedding, called me to finalize her arrival time. We talked for a while. Rosa was one of those people who couldn't make a short call, and somewhere in the middle of it, she mentioned she'd seen a photo of Bex on a mutual friend's social media. A group dinner in Columbus, Rosa said. Looked fun, she said. When was that? She thought she'd seen Cole in the background. I kept my voice casual. Oh, probably just a coincidence. Cole knows a lot of people. Might have been someone who just looked like him, Rosa said, already moving on. After the call, I found the photo. It took me 11 minutes of scrolling through a semi-private account. But I found it. A group dinner at a restaurant in Columbus, 4 weeks ago. I recognized 3 faces in the background. One was a woman from Cole's office I had met at a work party. One was someone I didn't know. And one was Cole, sitting next to Bex. The photo was tagged in Columbus. The same weekend Cole had told me he was in Chicago for a project kickoff meeting. I had driven him to the airport. I had texted him when he landed, and he had sent back a photo of a terminal that I now looked up and confirmed was Chicago O'Hare. He had gone to Chicago. But he had also been in Columbus with my sister at some point that weekend, and he had told me nothing. That was the moment the file closed, not because of the photo itself, but because I sat with it for 2 days, and the sadness didn't arrive the way I expected. It arrived slowly, in layers. First, about Cole, then about Bex, then about this specific kind of betrayal. The kind that requires planning, requires coordination, requires 2 people looking you in the eye and deciding, repeatedly, that this was acceptable. I thought about the invite on the fridge. The sage green lettering. I thought about the 147 guests who had RSVP'd. The flowers being delivered on the 13th. The rehearsal dinner my mother had been quietly planning for 3 months. The dress in my closet. I thought about all of it, and I made a decision. Not an emotional one. A strategic one. I called Jody. I told her everything this time. She was silent for a long time, and then she said, "What do you need from me?" "I need a few days," I said. "Don't say anything. Not to anyone. Done. And I need to know. Are you 100% certain about what you saw in the parking lot?" 100%, she said immediately. I hung up and sat at my kitchen table for a while. I thought about all the times Bex had hugged me at the door and told me she was so happy for me. I thought about her voice when she said it. Warm and easy and real sounding. I had never once questioned it. I was starting to understand that being good at reading people was not the same as being willing to read them. I had all the skills. I had just been choosing not to use them. That was done now. I opened a new document. Not a spreadsheet this time. A plan. The first thing I did was call my attorney. Not a dramatic move. I had an attorney because forensic accounting work occasionally requires one. I called her Monday morning, before Cole was even awake, and I told her I was 11 days from a wedding, and I had reason to believe my fiancé had been in a relationship with someone else for an unknown period of time. I asked her what I needed to know. She asked me 3 practical questions, answered 2 of them herself, and told me the most important thing I could do right now was document everything and do nothing that altered the financial agreements already in place. Cole and I had a joint account we'd opened 8 months ago for wedding expenses. We were 3 weeks from combining our finances more fully after the wedding. A plan we had made together, written down together, talked about openly. I told my attorney the balance in that account. She said, "Don't touch it. Don't move anything. Don't close anything. Just document." I thanked her, and went back to bed and lay there in the dark next to Cole and stared at the ceiling. The joint account had $41,000 in it. Both of our contributions. Every month for 8 months. Automatic transfers. But we had built that together for the start of our life together. And I had been planning to add the remainder of my savings after the wedding. Another $19,000. $19,000 that Cole would have had access to the moment we were married. I thought about that. I thought about the timeline, and then I did what I do, professionally. I looked at the structure of a situation from the outside, and I asked, who benefits? Cole worked a stable job but carried debt. Student loans, one credit card balance he'd been slow to pay down. He had mentioned, twice in the past year, that once we were married and our finances were merged, he wanted to pay off those debts quickly. I had agreed, because that's what partners do. I had thought of it as building something together. I wasn't sure anymore what he had thought of it as. I'm not saying it was about money. I genuinely don't know. But I know that when you're in my line of work, you learn to look at behavior in the context of incentive. And Cole had two strong incentives. My sister, who he clearly had feelings for, and a wedding date that was moving him toward a financial merger with someone he may have already been planning to leave. I didn't know which came first. Maybe he'd fallen for Bex after the engagement. Maybe it had been developing for longer. Maybe the money had nothing to do with it, and I was overlaying my professional brain onto something that was purely emotional. But I needed to account for every possibility. The second thing I did was start quietly unwinding, not loudly. Not in a way Cole would notice. I called the venue first, Helen, the coordinator, and I explained, carefully and privately, that I had a personal situation developing, and I needed to know the cancellation terms without triggering any formal action yet. Helen was professional and discreet. She told me exactly what I needed to know and asked no follow-up questions. I made the same call to the florist, the caterer, the photographer. I kept every call brief and vague and warm. I said something about a family health issue that might affect timing. Nobody pushed back. The wedding industry sees more of this than it lets on. The dress I would handle separately. Through all of this, I was completely normal at home.
That part surprised even me.
I made dinners. I asked Cole about his week. We talked about the honeymoon itinerary, Portugal, which had been my idea and which I had spent hours planning. I listened to him talk about it with what seemed like genuine excitement, and I nodded and said things like, "That restaurant looked amazing and I can't wait," and my voice didn't shake once. I had one moment of near collapse. Wednesday evening, Cole pulled me into a hug from behind while I was cooking, and rested his chin on my shoulder and said, 8 more days, and there was something in his voice, warmth, or a reasonable facsimile of it, and for just a second my throat closed and I thought, what if I'm wrong? I stood there for a moment and let myself feel that. Let myself sit in the possibility that I had misread everything, that the receipt had an explanation, that the Columbus photo was a coincidence, that Jody had seen something innocent in a parking lot. And then I thought about my mother saying, Bex mentioned some tension. That one didn't have an innocent version. That one was deliberate. I stirred the pasta and said, 8 more days, back to him. The conversation with Bex I saved for last, and I approached it carefully. I texted her on Thursday and asked if she could meet me Saturday for coffee. Just the two of us, wedding stuff. I wanted to run by her. She responded within 4 minutes. Of course! I'm so excited, yes! 2 exclamation points. I sat with my phone and thought about the girl I had grown up with. The one who used to sleep in my bed during thunderstorms. The one I had driven to the hospital when she had a panic attack at 23 and didn't want to call our parents. The one who had stood beside me in the dressing room when I said yes to the dress. I thought about all of that, and I put my phone down and I did not cry, though I came closer to it than I had all week. I arrived at the coffee shop 10 minutes before Bex. I got us both our usual orders. She always got the same lavender latte, I knew that. I had always known small things about her, the way you do when someone is built into your life from the beginning. She came through the door smiling. I smiled back, and somewhere underneath the smile, something very quiet and very certain had finished settling into place. I let her talk first. She sat down, wrapped both hands around her latte, and immediately launched into wedding excitement. Wasn't she nervous? Was I sleeping okay? Had the flowers been confirmed? She had been thinking about her toast. Did I want her to clear it with me first, or just go for it? The toast question is what steadied me, actually. She was planning her toast for my wedding. While she was sleeping with my fiancé, I let her finish the thought, and then I said, very evenly, I know, Bex. She laughed first. A small, confused laugh. Know what? About you and Cole. The laugh stopped. I watched her face do a very specific thing. A flicker, quickly controlled. Not guilt, exactly. More like recalculation. She was deciding what version of this conversation to have. Mara, I don't. The Columbus dinner, I said. The parking lot at my birthday. The phone call to Mom about how we seemed stressed. I kept my voice quiet. We were in a coffee shop. I was not going to perform this. I'd been watching this for 3 weeks. I just needed to be sure. The silence that followed lasted long enough to confirm everything I hadn't been 100% certain about until that moment. She didn't deny it. What she did was start crying, which I had expected. She apologized immediately, which I had also expected. She said it hadn't been planned, which I had expected too. It just happened, she said. And I know that phrase is supposed to function as a softener, as an appeal to chaos rather than choice. But it doesn't work on me the way she hoped it would. Nothing that requires sustained coordination across multiple months just happens. I let her cry. I didn't comfort her. I also didn't punish her with coldness. I just sat there, present, and waited. Then she said, "Are you going to cancel the wedding?" And that told me something. Not, "I'm so sorry, what do we do?" but "Are you going to cancel the wedding?" As if the wedding was the variable she was most concerned about. As if she had already, somewhere in the back of her mind, been mapping out what happened next. I said, "I already have." Her face shifted. What? I called the venue last week. And the florist. And the caterer. I just needed this conversation before I talked to Cole. She stared at me. You? Before you talked to Cole? I wanted you to understand that I'm not doing this out of anger, I said. I'm doing it because I'm not going to marry someone who's been lying to me. And I'm not going to pretend my sister didn't help him do it. I picked up my coffee. I took a sip. I love you, I said. I genuinely do. But I'm going to need a lot of time and space before we can figure out what's left of this. She was crying harder now. I stayed calm. Not because I didn't feel anything. I felt everything. A complicated, painful everything. But because I had already done the falling apart privately, in pieces, over the past 3 weeks. I had cried in the shower twice. I had sat in my car outside work and let myself be a mess for 10 minutes, and then walked in and done my job. The grief had been happening quietly this whole time. By the time I was at this table, it was no longer raw. It was a fact I had already learned to carry. I left the coffee shop first. I drove home and walked into the apartment, and Cole was on the couch with his laptop. He looked up and smiled and said, "How was Bex?" And I said, "We should talk." I'm not going to describe that conversation in detail because, honestly, most of it is not interesting. He confirmed what I already knew. He cried. He apologized. He said things about timing and feelings that were probably true and also completely beside the point. He asked if there was any way to work through it. I said no. I had already spoken to my attorney about the joint account. We agreed on a clean split, contribution by contribution, no dispute. He moved out 9 days later. 4 of those days were the ones that would have been our wedding weekend. I don't think that was intentional on anyone's part. It was just the shape time took. The week of June 14th, I went to the botanical garden, not for anything dramatic. I had a meeting nearby and I walked through after, just to see it on the day that had been ours. The ceremony space was set up for someone else's wedding. Pale yellow flowers. Wooden chairs in neat rows. It was beautiful in the way those places always are. I stood off to the side for a few minutes, not close enough to intrude, just watching. A woman in a dress was laughing with someone just outside the entrance, and she looked so happy and so nervous, and I felt, honestly, fond of her. Fond of people who trust. Fond of that specific terrifying act of deciding to build something with another person. I was not cynical about it. I wasn't even sure I was sad about it, exactly, standing there. I was sad about Bex. That part doesn't have a clean resolution. We have spoken twice since May. Both calls were short and careful. I don't know what we are to each other right now. I love her, and I'm angry. And those two things are not competing. They exist in the same space. We are figuring out whether the relationship survives this and what shape it takes if it does. I kept the invitation on the fridge for a while. Then one morning, I took it down and put it in a drawer. Not to forget it, just to stop seeing it every day. My name is Mara Ellison. I am 30 years old now. I still work in forensic accounting, and I'm still in Cincinnati, and my apartment is mine alone, and that is okay. If this story stayed with you, please give it a like. It really does help. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe if you want more, and drop a comment below. Would you have done anything differently? I genuinely want to know.